Here we go again, and it is time to welcome Florian Andreas Kolb, the Chief Commercial Officer and General Manager Energy at Intertrust, for our first fireside chat session of the day. Today, together with Rokas Peciulaitis, the founder and managing partner at Contrarian Ventures, and they will discuss the new U.S. energy policies. So, welcome to
Thank
our
you.
studio. This is only the second real person in our studio because everything went digital. So the floor is yours.
How
Happy to be
boring
here.
is that?
Happy to be here. Hey, Florian, happy to see you today with us. I know it's pretty late at night for you, so really appreciate the effort. For those joining in, I would like to do a short introduction, and I'm super excited about the topic we're going to deep dive with Florian. So Florian is a good friend and really an avid supporter from day one of EnergyTechSummit, and we really appreciate that. And Florian has had numerous years career in the energy sector, starting with RWE, leading, first steps of E.ON going into technology and investing technology as part of with energy now. So Florian has been running a very successful corporate venture capital arm out of Silicon Valley. And then also, I think what I was very impressed when I started off in the energy sector to learn about free electrons, which is a great accelerating program that I think Florian champions. So I'm super excited today to have a chat with him and deep dive into a very interesting topic. So we had Secretary of Department of Energy of US in the morning addressing with a strong address on the $23 trillion opportunity. I don't even know, how many numbers are in that number, but definitely a large number, taking account that US GDP is 21 trillion. So we're up to an interesting discussion to really understand where we're going with these massive policies that across different continents, and very ambitious plan indeed for US, especially. The plan is almost 2x more ambitious than from the one that was implemented by Obama back in the days. President Biden has really ambitious goal to cut it by 52%, the U.S. Greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. So, Florian, let's kick off the discussion. So what's your view on the current climate energy framework in place, both, carved by the U.S. administration?
Yeah, thank you, Rokas, for having me. And it's a pleasure to be here, even it's like 2:00 in the morning in California. Welcome, everyone, from the other side of the planet. Hopefully next year we will do this in person. I'm really missing it.
Absolutely.
So, oh man, this has been a hell of a ride the last 6 years in the US. I mean, you mentioned the Obama administration. Now you mentioned the Biden administration. It feels hard to mention what was in between. And I think from an energy perspective, I mean, the attitude and the contrast couldn't be more different than what we've seen in the last 6 years. So we came from, I would say, a moderate progressive government to a government that neglected the existence of climate change. And now we have the Biden administration. And I think if you look where Biden and his team are coming from, then if you wind back like the same time last year, then in the Biden campaign in 2020, clean energy was there, but it was less pronounced in the beginning. And what happened here is that Biden and his team got like significant headwind from many pressure groups that brought the clean energy topic to his attention. And I think the analysis is that a lot of the points and the requests that these groups proposed and put forward were adopted and are now positions of the government. And, of course, obvious things like rejoining the Paris Agreement. I think in the early announcement of the campaign, there was already talk that there would be like a $400 billion spent over 10 years on clean energy and innovation. It didn't really specify where this was going to. So that's kind of the frame. And I think based on that frame, what they did, they derived all these meta goals, like the United States wants to be carbon neutral by 2050.
Yep.
They announced, I think last week, a 50 to 52% reduction from 2005 levels in economy-wide net greenhouse gas pollution by 2030, and so on. So I think that's of course a complete pivot, as we would say in startup land, from where the United States have been last year around the same time.
Feels like it's not just a pivot, it feels like a U-turn. I think the rejoining of Paris Agreement was obviously a really a milestone for first days in the office for President Biden and the team. So there's quite a few numbers out there. I think the big number is the 23 trillion. That is more than the number that all cumulative countries, what they can benefit from, and the million, obviously, jobs that going to be created out of this sustainable energy shift. Maybe going deeper is obviously this infrastructure plan that was announced last week in the Leaders Summit that was hosted by President Biden with all the leadership from different countries and as well as entrepreneurs like Bill Gates. And that number was more like 2 trillion that is going to go directly in the US economy. I think it'd be great to pick your brain on kind of breaking down that number to understand really what does that mean. And I think a lot of it has been a push on the infrastructure, right? And we are here, we have two words that definitely feed into that agenda, which is energy and summit, but we have the one word in between, which is tech. And I think that's what we're very interested about, being both as investors and yourself being working in one of the leading companies, Intertrust, that is trying to disrupt. So let's kind of try to break down this big number and try to understand. What are your thoughts on that? I know we did some heavy lifting there to understand.
Yeah, definitely. So, I think what this plan in general should do on the energy side is to contribute to the goals that have been articulated also around electrical energy, which are, for example, to achieve a zero emission from the power sector and a carbon-free grid by 2035, which includes nuclear and hydro, which is, I think, a bit of a tweak, because I think in Europe and in other parts of the world, people would not necessarily include at least nuclear to renewables, especially in Germany. I have a German background, so there, we decided the nuclear exit, so that's not renewables for us, but that doesn't really matter. I think another measure that is linked to this plan is a national standard that is proposed that requires utilities to use a specific amount of solar, wind, and other renewable energy, which is like scattered and different per state today. So I think California has quite a strict regime, but other states not. So that they want to harmonize that. And of course, the question is then, what are the costs and where's the money coming from and what are government incentives? And I think that feeds into the 2.3 trillion plan. And I think the way I look at the 2.3 trillion is a bit in the overall context. What are the assumed costs for becoming 100% renewable globally? And there's like fascinating research, I think, which originated in 2009 at Stanford University, which has been updated over the last 10 to 12 years and which has been confirmed multiple times. And when you take the essence of all this research over the last decade, then the assumption is that for the world to become 100% renewable energy driven in 20 years would cost around $100 trillion. So that's an even bigger number.
We're talking
trillion number that Secretary Granholm mentioned that I heard today for the first time. And for example, if you break that down to an economy like Germany, that means around 2 trillion in 20 years to reduce the CO2 emissions by 85% in 2015. So the reason why I'm mentioning that is so it kind of feels that these numbers, seem to be thought through to a certain extent.
Yep.
And there seems to be some backup and rationale around it. Now, I think for energy tech, of course, the question is, which areas will be funded, how will the funds flow,
Yep.
what does that mean for demand for technology, where should we put our attention to? And I think if we break down the 2.3 trillion, then there is a big area that's mentioned, which is like 174 billion for EVs, electric vehicles, and technology that supports their adoption. So that's an obvious area, but a very explicit one.
And I think US has been doing pretty well on the technology side on that, as a matter of fact, right? You have Tesla, you have Proterra for the bus, you had a few companies that are innovating in the hydrogen space for long-haul freight trucks. So definitely technology has been there. I think now it seems that EV charging, etc., with a massive amount of SPACs going in the market as well, finding their way to public markets, seems to be definitely an area that they will push hard now on. What else?
Definitely. And what's what comes into my mind, what's one of the, I think, unsolved problems in this space yet, and that's also confirmed if you speak to people from the public utility commissions here in the United States, is when this EV revolution is coming, the electricity needs to get to the cars. How does it get to the car in a situation where the electrical infrastructure is, I would say, kind of suboptimal? Every visitor to the United States, at least from Europe, recognizes that a lot of the power lines are hanging between trees and bushes in the middle of the street, because that's the system that people have decided for many decades ago.
And as a matter of fact, had quite substantial implications from it, right? Like not to mention the big fires in the California, as a matter of fact, and really can break down the utilities as per se.
Yeah, resilience issues are, of course, then the result that it doesn't feel like a very resilient system. And I mean, I think there are like videos on YouTube where you see these transformers blowing up that are on the top of the poles in the street because 5 people come home at the same time and plug in their cars to charge. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity around the orchestration of the system. The good news that a lot of this orchestration will be built on software. So we had another talk a few weeks ago where it was hardware versus software, and from a venture or from a entrepreneurial aspect, of course, on the software side, I think there are a lot of companies trying to contribute to that, but there will be more opportunities. I think the second block here is, in this plan, there are 180 billion earmarked for clean energy and in climate change related R&D. And what's interesting is that this also includes language that money should be provided for commercializing some of these technologies. And I think this is more earmarked for the hardware side, because I think everybody understands that finding funding for new technologies on the hardware side is not an easy one, and that's where the government can help.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I think, as a matter of fact, I think there's been some private initiatives that have been also trying to advocate and streamline those. I think, Bill Gates' Breakthrough Energy Ventures is a good example of one of those, where really pushing for, hardware companies to be commercializing. Another one to mention probably is Engine. It's part of MIT, and these type of institutions, including Stanford, obviously, are taking the breed of new innovation that is coming to market. And we then kind of, have these even possibilities to invest in this infrastructure, right? I think the plan is called infrastructure plan, but in reality, we're not doing roads and tolls, right? We're actually building infrastructure that, without the software part, becomes completely irrelevant, because we're not just building more charging stations out there. All some of those have to be connected into a singularity, in a way, in a grid context. And if that doesn't happen, you have the situations like Texas, right? With, again, climate change impacting the temperature change, but at the same time not being ready for these type of events happening. And as we see, it's spring out here, plus 15 degrees, and the other day we had snow. So climate is not about getting warmer, it's about the variability, impact, and unpredictability of that. So definitely interesting. And then I think the next kind of thing is the property tech, right? Like the built world that has been kind of forgotten. As a matter of fact,
Yeah.
you know, cities consume great majority of the greenhouse gas emissions. I think the number is something like 70%. And then in reality, also the most electricity consumed is in those cities. And as a matter of fact, built world is the biggest chunk. That seems to be also an interesting part in that 2.3 trillion plan.
Exactly, and I think they earmarked 213 billion for building energy efficiency, which, you know, I think that's always as you said, it's often forgotten, but I mean, it's like I think 1/3 of all of emissions, you know, are probably building related, and then, you know, people and cities, and that adds up to the 70 that you've mentioned.
And really, in the reality, I think people forget it for one reason. It's not just electricity that is being consumed. It's cement that these buildings are built off. Like cement industry as such is a very significant part of that. And then you have steel industry and what it pretty much takes from A to Z to build a building and operate it for the next 40, 50 years with that building up, you know, kind of depreciating schedule looks like. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and heating and cooling and things like that. And, you know, I think it's also for policymakers, it's an attractive area because there, I think you know, if you support upgrading programs, there's a very direct link to jobs because, you know, a lot of these upgrades require, you know, physical labor. So, you know, there targets like the construction industry, and that's something that, you know, is very, very important. And also, I think we come to this later, but also in this plan, I mean, there's like a very, very big job element, and Secretary Granholm also mentioned it very explicitly, and there's a good reason for that. Yeah. I mean, I think overall, it's still early days, and I think it's still, I mean, from my perspective, unclear where the money will go to and how it will look like, which is fine. I mean, you know, Biden has like his first 100 days and he's done a lot already. So I think, you know, there's a lot of opposition, of course, on the side of the Republicans, and, you know, some of these bills will need bipartisan support. So I think it will take like at least another 6 to 12 months to really understand, you know, how this is broken down and how can it be operationalized. And, you know, my recommendation is to just watch closely what's going on, and then, you know, see where the opportunities will pop up.
So you're nearing us to the right question. So what do you think are the challenges for the government?
Yeah, I think a lot. So the first question is, of course, is this good enough?
Yeah. Absolutely, I think.
I mean, the United States, I think, is responsible for 15% of all CO2 emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, as far as I know. And so without the US, you know, the whole Paris agreement thing has a hard time to fly.
Yeah.
And
we're happy that they're back.
Yeah, that's good. And I think there's like research that supports at least the ambition that they have articulated should, you know, contribute so that, you know, the reduction targets can be met. And but whether, you know, the Biden policies that have been announced are enough to reach the goals that the Biden administration has articulated, I mean, remains to be seen. Yeah. So whether this is really, it sounds great and it sounds like very ambitious, but I think we will find out soon, you know, whether this ambition level really contributes to the targets as needed. I think another area that I was surprised of, because is how heavily loaded the whole energy subject is in domestic politics. So there's a huge energy justice element in the whole debate. Actually, there are like task force around energy justice that have
You
been
mean
formed now in the
inclusion
DOE.
as part of that shift?
It's inclusion, so it's race and class, and how do you ensure that distressed communities can benefit from these energy policies? That is something that was really new to me, but I think it shows that how complex the stakeholder environment is and how difficult it is, to take everything into account, because these are like additional variables that politicians and policymaking has to consider. So how do we avoid that, distressed communities are penalized further, or if you try to incentivize new industries, how do you ensure that the weaker communities get like a fair share? And that's the ambition that they have articulated. But you can't really order companies, to set up shop somewhere in the Midwest if they don't see a rationale for it. So of course you can incentivize that with tax credits and things like that. So there's a lot that needs to be done. And I think finally what you see here is that also some of the underlying technologies that are proposed, and it also have been mentioned by Secretary Granholm, like carbon capturing,
Yep.
and the role of hydrogen, are also pretty heavily disputed. There's like a pretty intense debate between different fractions whether these are technologies that should be applied or not, and in which form. On the hydrogen side, the hydrogen from renewables or from gas, so blue versus green hydrogen. So I think this will be like a pretty intense debate, and at the end, people have to reach a consensus.
Yeah.
And this will take some time, but I think there's a lot on the plate.
No, absolutely. I think one thing from, you mentioning domestic politics, I think there is also an international politics element as well for US. And I think
yes.
Secretary Granholm actually outlined that I think, consistently for her speech that, US is not trying to just solve their own problem. They're really inviting the general international community for various ways how this dialogue could be started, but not just discussing it, but actually implementing it. So I think the kind of US has been the dominant force behind technological innovation for quite some time. I think if we go more geopolitical politics, like China has been definitely investing in this space for quite some time now, and in some instances have dominant power, like batteries. I think hydrogen and batteries are one of the most discussed agendas as part of European context as well, right? So I think it's sort of in the flux. I think how geopolitically a lot of these topics will be addressed, and there will be different strategies implemented, but it's surely that there is consensus that there's a lot of cooperation between countries happening. And I think even in the summit, we have 10 plus ministers of climate, oil, energy, depending on the country, how they define it. But definitely an interesting, both domestic discussion as well as international one, which is probably
absolutely
more and more important.
I mean, you mentioned China, and I mean, just if you wind back a decade, I mean, what caused the last clean energy bubble to burst? I mean, of course, there was like a recession, but there was also China deciding that manufacturing of PV panels and battery becomes like a core part of their strategic industrial policies, and that kind of destroyed a lot of the hopes of clean tech in the early or mid 2000s. And we don't know what's going to happen next. So you're right. I mean, and of course there's a risk that it's being used for other political policies or actions, and also misused. I mean, given the attention the topic gets, and also the transparency around the numbers and the impacts, and also I think the Paris Agreement delivers like the framework that you need to exclude something of the things that haven't worked in the past bilaterally between governments and states, or unilaterally in some cases.
Florian, I think I want to deep down into the main word of the discussion, technology. Whether you touch hydrogen, whether you touch battery technologies, whether you touch, I think, anything related to EV infrastructure and EVs themselves, that powers down to really technological advancements. Whether we take viability of hydrogen, whether that's green hydrogen, and things like carbon storage or sequestration, it's all technological innovations. As a matter of fact, for them to be feasible, they have to be economically sufficient, right? To be implemented at large scale. So what is this plan? What is this intention? This shift in focus and really, I would say, joint effort by all countries, especially led by US, mean for technological companies, both in US and abroad? What's your take?
I mean, first of all, I think this provides to all companies that are in the space a very strong push, because there is a significant signaling effect. If the US announces what they have announced, and that's true for the US market, it's true for Europe, for Asia. I think globally there's just like a confirmation that this is an important sector, this is an important industry, and growth is to come, which is what entrepreneurs look for. And we discussed some of the problems, and the problems are huge. So it's a very rich problem space. It has political support. It's on everyone's agenda. It has become a voting issue, which I think, a few years ago, it was like, yeah, nice, let's talk a little bit about climate change. And other than green parties in Europe, it was not political mainstream. Now it's political mainstream. And that's very, very good news, I think, for entrepreneurs. And what you see happening already before the US election and all these announcements is that money is pouring into the sector already. So we have, like, in the last 6 months, we had like the SPAC mania with IPOs in the US. So
we have more EV. I think more EV companies emerged from this than through the last 50 years.
Yeah, and that shows what access to capital and also investor expectation can do, and that's actually great. So I mean, we have to be, of course, careful that the market is not overheating. I already referenced the last clean tech bubble, which emerged in 2005, 2006. I personally think that the circumstances are different today. So we have a low yield environment. We have money looking for an investment. We have the whole ESG and climate change shift in all sectors of the economy. And, I think pre-pandemic, there was like the United Nations climate conference. And, I happened to spend an evening with a guy who gave like a keynote there. And he told me that it just feels like very, very big. And he hasn't seen that before, how present it is across governments, across industries. And that wasn't the case like 12 years ago. And of course, the cost for renewable energy are super low. I when I came to Silicon Valley, I told everyone electrons will be for free. So free electrons, the price will be zero. And some people thought I'm
who's this crazy German?
Yeah, but I mean, it's still not there, but it's getting there, and the marginal cost is more or less zero. So, and that also helps, because then the business case for doing things differently becomes more viable. And look at EVs. I mean, 10 years ago, if someone would have predicted where we are today, that all major car companies abandon combustion engine cars from their programs in a few years, nobody would have believed that. And Elon Musk was being perceived as the crazy guy from Silicon Valley, who is doing crazy stuff with the money he made with a payment system operator. So I think this is here to stay. There will be volatility, but it's irreversible. And I think this is probably the most exciting time in energy tech that we've seen forever.
to be both entrepreneur and an investor here, I think.
Of course. Yeah,
I think
both have to be there.
Final thought, entrepreneurs are very, resilient and persevere. Like the perseverance is the most, probably my favorite word to use to find someone who's probably survive and really gonna make it happen. Do you think that this really crazy amount of money coming from a government is gonna be fast enough to be adopted and used? Technology companies are very fast to, innovate and go. I think we always underestimate the next 20 years, but overestimate the next 5 years. That's the kind of logic we always say. We're gonna fly the cars, but then in reality, as Peter Thiel said, we get 140 characters. What do you think is the kind of what is the one message that you want to say to maybe governments that are listening to as part of this EnergyTechSummit?
Well, I think it's all good. And the reason is because the signaling effect that it sends, the announcement of these programs, I think this is already good enough because, if you're like a tech startup or so, you typically don't raise money from governments, but you go to venture capitalists or you get some grants, which is a nice addition, but it's, I don't think, like a sole source of funding, at least in the US. And so I think it's okay. And, we all know that the governments, they take time. And of course, the quicker they provide clarity around, how this is going to work, the better. And I think that's important. And that's, I think, what they can do. They can't, just, throw around with money without having a plan. But my advice or my request is, break down what you announced as quickly as possible, set the boundary conditions so that investors and entrepreneurs, find guidance and orientation, and that's okay. But I don't think that, entrepreneurs will bet their companies on government money showing up. I don't see that really happening. I mean, for, large infrastructure related programs, things like tax credits or project finance and stuff like that is relevant. In the tech space, that's maybe less relevant.
Thanks a lot, Florian. I think we're running out of time. It has been a pleasure having you. Thanks a lot for your commitment at this late time in San Francisco, and really great chatting with you.
Thank you for having me. It was awesome, and I hope to see you soon in person. Thank you to everyone, and have a great day and rest of the conference. Thank you.
Many thanks to Rokas and Florian. Well, that was really great idea about that free electron. So let's wait
Absolutely.
it to happen someday.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much both for really engaging discussion. And we are moving forward to another fire chat discussion.